mentioned, I'm a city councillor in the borough of Westminster, which is, you may have heard of Westminster, it's a small part of London. I got elected in 2013, and I combined my political work with being a dentist. So I'm 4 days a week dentistry, and I do some political work on the side. So probably two of the most disliked professions in society represented in me. There was one time where I actually thought to myself, I had a patient sat on my chair, and I looked at her notes, and I realised that she lived in the ward that I was standing for election in. So I said to her, so are you going to be voting in this upcoming election? And she said to me, I am not. I won't trust any of them. They're all absolutely corrupt. And the nurse continued to press her and said, so will you vote Conservative or will you vote Labour? What are you going to do? And the patient said, again, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. It's private, and the thing is, they're all utterly corrupt. At this point, I've given her an injection, so her mouth is half numb, and her head is between my legs, and I thought, well, I better tell her what I'm doing. So with a drill in my right hand, I said, the thing is, I'm actually your Conservative candidate, and I'm standing for election. And she looked at me and she said, I'm definitely voting for you. So at that moment, I realised the two don't go together all that well. But being a city councillor is hugely varied. I have been involved in things that I never thought I'd be involved in. So the last few months looking at refugee policy, how we welcome refugees to the city of Westminster. So I have the responsibility of liaising with some of the churches in Westminster, some of the Anglican churches, my colleague does the Catholic churches. In terms of planning that was mentioned earlier, I have responsibility for planning in my ward, which is Marylebone High Street, and I also sit on a planning committee in the city. So we sit on 4 people like this, we listen to applications, and we decide whether they get built or not. And when real estate in central London is worth sometimes up to £3,000 per square foot, those decisions have real consequences. Obviously, residents live next to those, and they are often writing to me and saying, listen, we're not happy about this has to change, we're not happy about this particular development. So it's a real challenge being an elected representative in this area, trying to get that balance between, we do need economic growth, and we have policies that we have to abide by, but at the same time, we can't have growth at the expense of everyone who lives there. Some of the things that I've been given responsibility for, some of the things involve public health, and particularly being a dentist and working in politics, those things have been quite interesting to be involved in. In Westminster, we have a 19-year life expectancy between the richest parts of the city and the poorest parts, and there is some real poverty in the city of Westminster. We have the 5th most deprived part of the UK is based in the city, and so we have some real issues. One of the biggest things that we've looked at is childhood obesity. So actually, when people in particular parts of the city, so for example, Harrow Road, Church Street, some of those areas, there is an awful lot of fast food, and there's an awful lot of immigration as well, and a lot of people don't know how to make good choices. So as a local authority, how do we help with some of that? And not all of it is government's job to do that, but there are some things that we can do. And I recognise that as a dentist, the biggest cause of admissions for children in the UK is dental decay, so too much sugar. And as a dentist, I recognise that in some ways this is a breakdown of relationships. Parents not explaining to their kids because they don't know how to brush their teeth or what foods to feed them, but also a breakdown in relationships between perhaps the state and individuals. So the state hasn't educated people well enough in terms of how we do that. But then looking at, as a city council, we have problems and we have to solve them. So looking at taking, for example, dental decay, actually, is it government's job to do everything? And I would suggest it's not. There are other people in society that can also help. So for example, trying to get the local voluntary groups to say, actually, this is something we're really important about, we really want to make a difference here. So getting them to help the messages in terms of childhood obesity, in terms of tooth decay. Working with our schools and saying, listen, we will give some money to pump prime some sort of programs, but actually we want you to do more as well. And again, an awful lot of it is education, but it is utterly fascinating to be involved in making some small difference here. Again, my background was not particularly political. The guy that was the council before me was there for 23 years, and he resigned very suddenly. And I just thought, you know what, there are things that I see in the city that I don't like. I'd love to see some change. And those are things that helped me to get elected. I used to live in Moldova, in Eastern Europe, and it was there that I got approached to become a human trafficker. This guy saw me in this bowling alley, and he came up to me and said, realised I was from the UK, and said, listen, I want you to bring people back to the UK for me. And obviously told him that wasn't really my cup of tea, but he said to me, listen, you can make some serious money. And it just thought to me, this is utterly ridiculous that someone is asking me to do this. Moldova is one of the biggest source countries in Europe. And then realising, being in Westminster, that actually many of those people end up in the city of Westminster. So me and a few friends got together and we thought, what can we do? So the local church I go to, which is All Souls in Oxford Circus, we said, actually, we'd love to do something here. And so we got a few friends together and we said to the police, we want to clear all the phone boxes in central London on a Saturday morning. We invited the local congregation and we also invited some of the community. There has never been so many people that turned up on an event on a Saturday morning in All Souls of history. So we had 100 people rocked up for this community event to go out and just clear the phone boxes. And the police and some of the relationships that were formed from this small act have gone on to form this charity. So the police said to us, never before have we seen such a huge number of people volunteer for one particular thing. And they realised that these guys were doing it not out of a motivation of they must do it, but actually they really cared for their community. And they didn't like the fact that kids were walking around, and these little cards, you've probably seen in the phone boxes, it's pictures of naked women who are advertising sex. And we thought, we need to clear this up. And obviously, as soon as they've gone, the next day they're back in again. But actually, there are some small things that we did. The police, as a result of that, said, we'd like to partner with you. And we now have a group of women that go out every Thursday night and spend time with the women in the brothels. Now, some would say it's government's job to do that. But actually, government, we don't have the time. Our cuts right now in terms of local government, we cannot do the things that we are, as well that we're commissioned to do. So we're having to look for new sources of doing things. But this charity, they're doing it out of a love motivation. So when they visit these women who are working in the sex industry, they open up and they share their stories. And it's only when they open up and feel trusted will they share exactly where they've come from. So we had a lady from Thailand who actually was trafficked and was there against her will. And it was only when she opened up we were able to help her. And because we have the connections with the police, we're able to talk to the police and say, listen, we would like you to help with this, can you help? So we now have an information sharing agreement with the police when we need to. And we also work quite closely with the local authority, so the City of Westminster, which is where I've been able to sort of do some work as well in terms of linking that up. And that's just one small way of thinking, actually, how do we tackle things in a city like Westminster, which has some huge issues, but we have some huge responsibilities as well. One of the other areas that I have been looking at was adult social care. So as we mentioned, we have an ageing population and a decreasing budget to pay for it. But at the same time, we have the NHS as well, which is also coming under strain in terms of how do we pay for all the operations and all the in-care that we have. So we've got two pots of cash. We have the local authority cash, which does care of the elderly, keeps people in their home for longer. But we have the NHS, which actually treats people in hospital. Now, most people want to stay in their own home when they're ill, but the reality is they have to get taken to hospital. So as a local authority, if we spend money trying to keep people in their homes for longer, so making the homes more appropriate for the illness they have, we don't receive any of the savings for that, the NHS does. So we've gone to the NHS and said, listen, let's work together, because if we prime some money into this, we can actually save you guys some money as well. So they've agreed to this and said, yes, we see that. So now we have a partnership whereby when we spend money from the NHS, it means it saves them money because fewer and fewer people actually need to be admitted, or it means they can be discharged more quickly because we've got the facilities in the city to be able to help them. And it's just some of those partnerships and just thinking a bit sort of outside the box how to do things better. One of the talked earlier about some of the high-rise buildings, and that's been a real issue. So in Westminster, a lot of our officers were called to help with the Grenfell response, the big fire that happened. And it's been really interesting to see actually what's happened from that. And I've spent some time on some estates campaigning, and you see these estates, and you have these big high-rise blocks, and in between them you have an awful lot of grass, and it says, no ball games, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you cannot do anything on the grassy areas. And you just think, actually, these people, they're living in these high-rise blocks, but actually the community there is decreased. And if you were to use the same space that has been used for no ball games and other bits of green, which looks really nice, but it's not being used practically in any way. Actually, if you were to redesign that in a way that is more relational, whereby perhaps you have the 2 ups, 2 downs, where it meant that Mrs. Smith could look out of her window and see her son playing on the street, whereas now we have people 33 floors up. They don't feel safe to let their kids out to play on the grass, which they can't play on the grass anyway because there's no ball games. But it's just some of those issues where how do we do it better? And being able to transform a city is going to take a long time because these buildings will cost billions of pounds to change, and to change estates is not a quick thing. So some of the wisdom in the 1960s that said we should put people in high rises, we're seeing some of the effects of that today. And again, just some of the things that we talked about earlier was looking at the crash co-located with an old people's home. And actually, because we're building currently a new old people's home, and I thought this would be phenomenal if we could do this. So I had chats with the architect, and they've put a community room in one of the old people's homes to be able to do just that. So it means that we can have young people coming in perhaps on a regular basis where there is noise. The old people can interact with young people on a more regular basis. So it is a real privilege, and I think that's just trying to sort of touch on some of the issues that we're involved in. But I do come back to an awful lot of the issues that it's not government's job to do everything. And I guess that's one of the reasons that I became more of a conservative. And I think there are good people in the Labour Party, phenomenal people, great people in the Lib Dems, and great people in the Conservative Party. But people are coming at it from a different perspective. And I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about is actually seeing a really strong society as well. And the cuts, I think, have been unfortunate in terms of how it's been done, and it said actually we want civic society to take up the slack. But actually, there were jobs that were always done better by the voluntary sector than government. So pre-48, the NHS was done by the voluntary sector. It was the synagogues, it was the churches, it was other religious groups that said, we have a responsibility to look after the people in our society. And I'm not saying we go back to that, but there are things whereby the voluntary sector could do better. So for example, visitation of the elderly, we have many people who are socially isolated that have no one visiting them. But actually, if we said to the local groups, would you mind visiting people? Because we have 5 minutes in which to go in, give them a meal, and get out again. Whereas there are people at the local church or local mosque or synagogue that actually do have 30 minutes and they could go in and do the shopping for them. And so it's some of those things that we're trying to encourage. So I'll leave that with you, but I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts, and to encourage you to get involved in politics as well, because it is easy. You can get involved very easily. People are crying out for people just to make a difference in their community, be that a school governor, be that a local politician, or even higher. Thank you.